Jumping into the number 5 spot of the best budget gaming mice is the Cooler Master MM711, coming in at a price tag of $24.95. If at any point during the video you want to check out any of the 5 mice in this video, there's Amazon links below for the US, UK, Canada, and international links, but let's talk about the MM711. Firstly, this uses a 3389 sensor. This is a very reliable, high-end sensor. It's been used for years and it's very proven at this point. Once you get above the 3389, it becomes very, very difficult to actually feel the difference between the higher end sensors. Beyond that, this has a 1000 hertz polling rate, 16,000 DPI, 400 IPS, and 50 Gs of acceleration. Let's get into the mouse itself. How is the build quality? Well, for the price here, it is fantastic, being a great shape for all grips. It has a cutout design, but with the Cooler Master logo, like instead of just the traditional honeycomb design, it's a little bit more of like a longer honeycomb. It feels well put together and it looks absolutely awesome. Possibly one of the best looking mice like of all time at this price point. Like 25 bucks, you're not expecting much. It definitely feels more expensive. Color options here are matte black, matte white, glossy white, and wilderness green. As for skates, you got virgin grade PTFE with 1 large skate at the front and 2 smaller skates in the bottom corners. This design does cause some drag. It's not absolutely perfectly smooth. You can get aftermarket skates, but yes. Now for the cable, this is an ultralight cable. It feels basically wireless. It's a great cable. It really has 0 resistance, especially if you have some slack on that cable, which you should have some slack on that cable. All right, now as for switches, these use Omron here. They feel great. They're not too light. They're not too heavy. Almost everyone will like these and they have a great sound. Now let's talk about programmable buttons. This has 7 programmable buttons and you can do that in Cooler Master's software, which is Master Plus. The left click cannot be programmed, but the 2 buttons on the left side, the right click, as well as the up and down scrolls and middle scroll wheel button can all be customized. So really you're only gonna be customizing probably maybe the scroll wheel and then the 2 side buttons there. So really you're looking at 3. That's what I would personally look at if I'm looking at this mouse, but yes, you do have a lot of customization there. Now talking about the scroll wheel, let's get into that. It is tactile here and it doesn't feel mushy. It's actually just right for in-game. If you want to easily and precisely switch between, well, your primaries or your secondaries, it's very easy to because it's nice and tactile and it's just the right amount of distance between them. Pretty impressive for around 25 bucks. Now as for weight, it's still a very impressive here, coming in at only 60 grams. That makes this the 2nd lightest mouse on the list. The MM711 has just been a go-to for me if you don't have much money. It definitely does not feel budget. Now this weight paired with the shape of it means FPS games are great. If you want to move at a faster pace, which not all the mice on the list are going to be that, but if you do want to move at a faster pace, well, this one is good for you. If you're looking for a mouse for slower games like Red Dead Redemption, the weight is just not going to matter as much. So don't be super attached to that spec. Make sure to get a mouse that's tailored to your experience and the kind of gameplay that you want to do. But again, for FPS, this is a great budget choice. All right, and lastly, let's talk about RGB. Even with that weight, this manages to have a ton of RGB both on the wheel and this massive diffuse section under the cutouts, which I think just looks absolutely awesome. But with that, let's move on to the number 4 spot, which is the HyperX Pulsefire Haste. Coming in at a price tag of $49.99. This uses the 3335 sensor. Now, like I've said before with this mouse, this sensor did have some issues with it. Now, the issues were not with the sensor itself, but with the implementation that a lot of non-name brand companies implemented it with. So even though you'll hear a lot of bad things about the 3335 sensor, HyperX doesn't have those problems because, well, they know how to implement the sensor. Making this, once implemented correctly, like HyperX did, it makes it a top tier sensor. So you're honestly not going to notice that much of a difference between this or something like the 3389, which is a very good sensor. Now this has a 1000 hertz polling rate, up to 16,000 DPI, 450 IPS, and 40 Gs of acceleration. Now as far as build quality, it is built quite well. And honestly, it's just a very good looking design. This uses the hexagon cutouts both on the palm area as well as the beginning of the left and right click, which I think looks great. There are small glossy accents all over the mouse, which really make it stand out and seem a little bit more special. Overall, for being a symmetrical ambi mouse, this is ergonomic feeling as the left and right clicks have dips for your fingers. This is something I really like because you don't always get that feeling with ambi mouses. Now, one of the other things that I really like about the build here is the texture. This actually has a very distinctive texture to it that's really enjoyable during gameplay. It's slightly rough and grippy, but it's not abrasive to the hands. So yeah, it's honestly really, really nice, and I wish more mice would use that kind of texture. All right, but let's talk color options. It either comes in black, which is what I have, or black and yellow. The skates here are 100% PTFE, and my least favorite part of the HyperX are the skates. There's 4 small skates in each corner, and because of their orientation, there is drag in both vertical and horizontal movements. However, it is not unplayable or offensively bad, and this would definitely not be a deal breaker for me personally, as I really like the HyperX for the money. Really wouldn't make that a deal breaker for me personally. For the cable, it's absolutely what you expect. It's that ultralight cable. If you keep some slack on it, it's basically going to feel wireless. And me personally, I prefer these ultralight cables over actual wireless mice. You never have to worry about reliability of connection. You're gonna have lower input lag most of the time, and you never have to worry about charging them. I love wired mice because you never have to mess with them, but again, personal preference. All right, now as for switches, these use TTC golden micro switches. It has a really nice feel, and it feels solid and doesn't feel like there's a huge amount of travel. That's something that I really, really appreciate, especially in a gaming mouse that maybe you're gonna be doing those faster gameplay styles like FPS gaming. Now, while this doesn't matter as much for slower gameplay styles, it still is nice and enjoyable to click something that doesn't have a ton of travel before it hits that click. All right, now let's talk programmable buttons. This uses HyperX Ingenuity software, which if you don't know, you have to get that on the Microsoft Store if you're using Windows. And 4 of the 6 buttons are fully customizable. However, the right and left click can only be switched between themselves. So you can swap them, but nothing else. So the 2 buttons on the left side, the middle click of the scroll wheel, and the button behind the scroll wheel can all be programmed. This is a few of them, but honestly, not a massive amount of programmable buttons like we saw on the previous MM711. But speaking about that scroll wheel, it has nice tactile bumps, but they are pretty vague. Definitely not as good as the MM711, and just an okay scroll wheel overall. It's not horrible, it's not offensive, but it's nothing amazing. As for the weight, this comes in at only 59 grams, making that the lightest mouse on the list, which makes this great for fast-paced FPS gaming or those who just like a lighter mouse to the feel. Now for RGB, like I said, it's only on the scroll wheel, but it does look great. But with that, let's move on to the number 3 spot, which is the Razer Viper. This retails for $79.99, but is very consistently on sale for around $49.99, which is a great price. This uses the Razer Focus 20K optical sensor. This is a tried and true sensor and is fantastic for gaming with no common problems. Now, the big thing with the Viper is that it has a absolutely massive 8,000 hertz pulling rate. This goes up to 20,000 DPI, obviously, 650 IPS, and 50 Gs of acceleration. Build quality here is very good without having cutouts and is a very light mouse. This is on the bigger side, but it's not super tall. It is very close to the desk itself. This is also an ambidextrous mouse with buttons on 2 sides. The side buttons on the left are also there on the right. So even if you are a left or right hand user, you're still gonna have those left click buttons or the right click buttons that you're gonna use your thumb for. So that's awesome. As for color options, this just comes in black. Now skates here are 100% virgin grade PTFE, and it honestly glides very nicely with no real noticeable issues or drag. Now the cable here is Razer's SpeedFlex cable. It's again one of those ultralight cable designs, and it's very good. If you keep slack on it, it's never gonna pull. Now the switches here are Razer's Gen 2 optical switches. If you've watched me for a little bit, you know that I've talked about these before. It has a very satisfying click. It's very tactile, which I really like. They aren't too light, they're not too heavy. It's overall just a really, really nice switch, and honestly one of my favorite switches in the industry, even still. As for programmable buttons, there are 10 in total using Razer Synapse. You can program the left and the right click, the scroll up, scroll down, middle scroll wheel button, 2 buttons on the left and the right side, and then that DPI button underneath the mouse. Now, the scroll wheel here has clear tactile bumps, but I would prefer a little bit crisper and a little bit heavier bump, but still better than almost 90% of scroll wheels out there. Now, as for weight, this weighs in at 71 grams. Now, this is a fairly older mouse. It's still very, very relevant, and it's at a great price now when comparatively to like when it first came out. You're getting a pretty high-end mouse for pretty budget prices, which is awesome, but this weighs in at 71 grams. But yeah, this is a very lightweight mouse mouse overall. You're not gonna have problems with it, especially for the size of it, because it is a large mouse. Now, RGB here is minimal with only a Razer logo lighting up. But with that, let's move on to the number 2 spot, which is the Logitech G305 LIGHTSPEED, coming in at a price tag of $39.99. This is the mouse that you want if you want a very budget mouse, but you still want a wireless mouse. This is the one that I would go with. This uses Logitech's Hero sensor, which is obviously a very, very good sensor for gaming. This hits a 1000 hertz polling rate up to 12,000 DPI, 400 IPS, and 40 Gs of acceleration. Build quality here is fantastic, having tons of color options. Overall, very, very well put together with no creaks or even wiggly parts, which is honestly pretty uncommon for mice, especially at this price point. And as far as size, this is for average sized and small hands. Obviously, this depends on grip, as you could get away with this if you had larger hands, but because of the weight, which this is a heavier mouse, this is not as good for that lower DPI FPS gaming. Still great overall, and you can definitely use this. It's not like it's not gonna work. But obviously, if you are that low DPI FPS gamer, mainly you may want to go with a lighter weight mouse over this. But if you play everything, if you play, GTA, Hell Let Loose, maybe Insurgency, Sandstorm, and then you also play like Call of Duty and Battlefield, well, this might be great to just kind of get all of them. Now, the color options here are immense, and this is really, really cool. They have black, blue, lilac, mint, and white. So you get a lot of color options that look very, very nice. The kind of pigment and tone, super nice. The skates here have 5 small PTFE skates. They aren't very large and they're noticeably scratchy, which does cause drag. So if you did want to upgrade these skates, you definitely could. Now, this is exclusively wireless. You cannot plug this in. You use a 2.4 gigahertz USB dongle, and this is some of the best wireless connectivity with range, consistency, and reliability at this price point, if not the single best. This never skips a beat, and this is really where Logitech excels over everyone else. Battery life here hits a claimed 250 hours, and that obviously depends on the batteries you use, because this does use batteries. You can either use a AA or you can get an adapter, which is what I recommend, and then use a AAA. That will decrease the weight. If you want to decrease the weight even more, use a AAA with a lithium battery, because those are going to be even lighter now. So then you're kind of decreasing the weight. That's an awesome way to decrease a lot of the weight on this mouse. However, with standard alkaline batteries, you can expect this for around 2 months in performance mode without turning it off. That is awesome. Like, also being able to just switch out the batteries mid-game kind of is nice. Now, switches are actually really good here. They are lighter and very clicky. I liked these when I was gaming, but some may like a heavier switch. If you're prone to accidental clicking, these are much, much lighter, but on the flip side of that, they also don't cause any sort of fatigue, even remotely, because they're so enjoyable to click. Now, as for programmable buttons, this is again not the one you want to get if you want a ton of programmable buttons, but this does have 6 programmable buttons using Logitech's G Hub. The left and the right click, the middle scroll wheel button, 1 button behind the scroll wheel, and then 2 on the left side of the mouse. The scroll wheel here is very nice and tactile with basically zero mushiness. They did a good job here, but we do expect that from Logitech for sure. Now, like I said, the weight is heavier due to the AA batteries coming in at 99 grams, which is a lot for its size. Do keep in mind though, that's with the standard AA battery. If you do switch that, if you change to a lithium, you can get that weight down to 86, 87 grams, and then you get that weight even more down if you go with a AAA lithium battery. That's really the way that you probably want to go if you're going to want to be doing FPS gaming and all other gaming with this mouse. But before we get to the number 1 spot, we have an honorable mention, which is actually the mouse that I would recommend over the Logitech G305 LIGHTSPEED if you want a slightly better wireless mouse, very similar in shape and size, but a little bit better overall. And this is the Razer Orochi V2, coming in at a price tag of $69.99, but it's consistently on sale for around 50 bucks. So it is more expensive than the Logitech, but it's very, very similar. A similar size, a similar shape, and it's also wireless. This uses the 3369 sensor, which is the Razer version of the 3335. This is a great and accurate sensor. This hits a 1000 hertz polling rate, up to 18,000 DPI, 450 IPS, and 40 Gs of acceleration. Even if you're doing fast FPS games, this sensor and the overall mouse itself responds very, very well to that. Well, as you would expect. Build quality here is great, as expected from Razer. like recently. Razer's build quality recently has been very, very good. There's no creaks and overall fantastic fit and finish. The entire top shell can be removed to expose the battery location, similar to the G305 LIGHTSPEED, and USB dongle storage, which I absolutely love. Now, as far as balance, because this is lighter and a little smaller than the Logitech, this feels better for faster whips and quicker gameplay. Overall, the feel of the mouse when gaming with low DPI is really, really good for the price and better than the Logitech. So if you want budget wireless and you're an FPS gamer, this is going to be better than the Logitech, but the Logitech is just such a good value at that price. Now for color options, you have a choice between black, pink, Roblox, which is like, you know, black and white, and then white. Now for skates, these use virgin grade PTFE, a long band across the top, and then another sizable skate on the bottom of the mouse, as well as a skate around the sensor. And because of this design, it glides very, very nicely. Now for connectivity, because again, this is wireless, this uses either a 2.4 gigahertz USB, or you can actually go into Bluetooth, which means you can actually use it with like your phone or tablet or something else like that. Battery life here is around 240 hours with a lithium AAA battery. So do keep that in mind. That is with the smaller lithium style battery. So that's very good. And again, because this is battery powered, there's no charging capabilities. But the one thing I will mention here that the G305 doesn't have is that this actually has 2 battery slots, either for a AA or a AAA. So you can actually decide which type of battery you're going to put into this, whereas the Logitech, you'd have to get a separate adapter. So that's really cool. Switches here are Razer's mechanical Gen 2 switches. They're nice and satisfying. They're not overly light. But again, comparing that to the G305 LIGHTSPEED, some people say those are too light. I really like them, but these are also fantastic. I don't think anyone's gonna have a problem with these switches. As for programmable buttons, there are 8 total programmable buttons using Razer Synapse. There are 2 buttons on the left side, 1 below the scroll wheel itself, which has 3 different programmable buttons, and then the left and right click. So again, if you want a ton of programmable buttons, not the mouse. The scroll wheel is very nicely tactile and a little bit sharper than the Logitech. The texture of the scroll wheel is super nice and grippy though. Now, weight here with the AAA lithium battery comes in at around 65 grams, and with a AA battery around 84.5 grams. But with that, let's move on to the number 1 spot, which is the Razer Basilisk V3, coming in at a price tag of $49.90. This uses the Razer Focus Plus optical sensor, which is fantastic for basically every gameplay style. This hits a 1000 hertz polling rate up to 26,000 DPI, 650 IPS, and 50 Gs of acceleration. Now this mouse is not the best for fast-paced gaming. It's definitely a larger, heavier mouse. But if you loved the Logitech G503, which has been a mouse that has kept the same shape for literally almost a decade, or maybe it even is a decade. If you're used to that mouse, the Razer Basilisk V3 builds on everything that the G503 was great at, but does it better, cheaper, and with more RGB. Okay, so the build quality here is amazing. Best on pretty much any mouse I've used, bar like full metal mouses. It's definitely a larger mouse as far as gaming mice go. This is a right-handed ergonomic mouse with a large thumb rest, again, exactly like the G503. For my hand size and grip, this feels amazing for long gaming sessions, especially those gaming sessions that aren't super fast-paced. I can definitely use this for FPS gaming, don't get me wrong, but not my preferred mouse. But what this does great is games like Insurgency Sandstorm, Hell Let Loose, Red Dead Redemption, right? Something like Squad. Games like that, this is gonna do amazingly well with. Or if you're doing MMOs, like this is also gonna work great for that. This has injection molding sides that fit my hands super, super nicely and provide really nice grip without being abrasive. Color options here are just black, but it has a ton of RGB, so you can kind of customize the color yourself. Now feet here are PTFE with 2 small skates on the top, 1 skate on the bottom, and 1 underneath the thumb rest. It glides very, very well with no pulling or dragging. Now the cable here is Razer's SpeedFlex cable. It never pulls. You never even really feel it if you have some slack on it. It's just like every other ultralight cable. Now the switches here are Razer's Gen 2 optical switches, and like I said, these have very satisfying clicks and overall a very comfortable weight to them. One of my favorite switches in the industry. As for programmable buttons, see, this mouse is one of the ones that you could be like, yeah, I'll buy that for the programmable buttons. This has tons with 13 total programmable buttons. There are 3 on the left side of the mouse. There are then the left and the right clicks, as well as the programmable scroll wheel that can be clicked left and right, similar to the G503. And then in the center, as well as the normal up and down scroll wheel. There are also 2 buttons behind the scroll wheel. The profile button underneath the mouse can also be programmed programmed as well. This mouse is great for sniping with the side sniper paddle to change the DPI to super low while holding the paddle. This is absolutely amazing. This is something I really found myself using a lot, especially in Hell Let Loose. Or if you ever play games where you're going to be getting to a position and then doing finer movements like sniping. I would consistently get into a hiding place, a bunker, being a machine gunner, and hold down that paddle. It makes you unbelievably precise when you're actually getting into the action. Being able to use that paddle is just fantastic. So a lot of games you can customize how this mouse is going to perform based on how you use it. That's one of the things I love about this mouse. Now the scroll wheel here feels great. It's tactile with the ability to switch between tactile and a free wheel. Also, like I mentioned before, you can program the left and the right scroll wheel clicks, which means you can actually push this to the left and the right, which is great. I actually used this one a lot, which I never did on the G503 because that had too much of a lead up and kind of felt a little bit vague. Now the weight here is heavier because it's a bigger mouse, but still better than you would expect for the size, coming in at only 101 grams. That's significantly less than the G503 from Logitech. And lastly, let's talk about RGB because it has tons. The mouse wheel all on the base and the Razer logo all light up super brightly. Probably some of the coolest RGB in any mouse ever. But again, if you want to check out any of the 5 or 6 mice, including the honorable mention, there's Amazon links below for the US, UK, Canada, and international links. But yeah, those are the top 5 best budget mice. Some of them are better paired for other games, but if you get any of the mice on the list, you really cannot go wrong. But yeah, this is a consumer tech review, and I'll see you guys in the next video.